Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine a typical Saturday afternoon. The sky is a slate of bruised gray, typical of a Belgian autumn. You are in the parking lot of a supermarket, pushing a cart with a wobbly wheel, your mind preoccupied with the mundane checklist of dinner ingredients and household chores. Around you, families are loading groceries into hatchbacks, children are pleading for candy, and the low hum of suburban life creates a sense of safety, a bubble of routine. Then, in a heartbeat, that bubble is shattered not by a natural disaster, but by the roar of an engine and the crack of military-grade gunfire. Men in trench coats and grotesque carnival masks emerge from the shadows, moving with the precision of soldiers and the cruelty of executioners. They do not shout for money. They do not hesitate. They simply open fire on men, women, and children alike. This was the reality for the people of Belgium in the early 1980s, a 3-year nightmare that left 28 people dead, 40 injured, and an entire nation paralyzed by fear. They were known as the Brabant Killers, or the Nivelles Gang. And over 40 years later, their identity, their motives, and the dark forces that may have pulled their strings remain one of the most terrifying unsolved mysteries in the history of modern Europe. To understand the sheer magnitude of this case, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Belgium during this era. The early 1980s were a time of deep, unsettling tension across the continent. The Cold War was freezing over once again, with nuclear missiles being deployed and anti-establishment sentiments rising. Internally, Belgium was a country fractured by linguistic and political divides, struggling with economic stagnation. But beneath the surface of political bickering, something far more sinister was festering. The law enforcement landscape was a chaotic patchwork of local police forces and the gendarmerie, a paramilitary force with a reputation for rigidity and, as we would later discover, potential corruption. It was a time when trust in institutions was eroding. And it was into this climate of uncertainty that the killers stepped, acting as if they were designed to exploit the very weaknesses of the state. The saga began quietly, almost innocuously, in comparison to the bloodbath that would follow. On March 13, 1982, a man entered a grocery store in Dinant. He wasn't there to buy food. He stole a riot gun, a weapon that would become a signature of the gang. This theft was the first ripple in the water, a preparation phase. 2 months later, in May, the violence escalated. A Volkswagen Santana was stolen at gunpoint. Then, in August, the first true robbery occurred at a grocery store in Maubeuge, just across the border in France. It seemed like a standard criminal enterprise, but analysts looking back would see the cracks in that theory immediately. The take was meager. The risk was disproportionately high. Throughout 1982, the attacks continued, growing bolder and more violent. A gunsmith was robbed in Wavre. Police officers were fired upon. But it was in 1983 that the gang's profile began to solidify into the stuff of nightmares. They struck supermarkets, not banks. They targeted the everyday citizen, turning the most safe and domestic spaces into slaughterhouses. During a robbery at a Colruyt supermarket in Nivelles, a couple stopping for gas and a police officer arriving on the scene were brutally killed. The killers utilized a level of firepower that was shocking for the time, wielding pump-action shotguns and submachine guns. They didn't just suppress resistance, they annihilated it. Witnesses began to describe 3 core members of this death squad, archetypes that sounded like they were ripped from a pulp fiction novel. First, there was the giant, described as extremely tall, imposing, and the leader of the operations. He commanded the scene with terrifying authority. Then there was the killer, smaller, wired, and described by survivors as having eyes that looked dead or crazy. He was the one who pulled the trigger with indiscriminate malice, seemingly enjoying the act of killing. Finally, there was the old man, often seen driving the getaway car, usually a high-performance vehicle like a Volkswagen Golf GTI. He was the calm in the center of the storm, an older figure who drove with the skill of a professional racer. As 1983 bled into the winter, the body count rose. They attacked a jewelry store, a textile factory, and another supermarket. In one particularly harrowing incident at the Auberge du Chevalier restaurant in Ohain, the motive seemed to shift entirely. This was not a robbery. The gang broke in, ignored expensive wine and cash, and instead tortured the husband and wife owners before killing the husband. It felt personal, tactical, or perhaps, as some investigators later theorized, an interrogation gone wrong. This incident stood out as an anomaly. If they were robbers, why leave the money? If they were terrorists, what was the political message? The silence from the group was deafening. No manifestos were mailed to newspapers. No calls were made to claim responsibility. They killed, they vanished, and they left a nation trembling. Then, strangely, the guns fell silent. The entire year of 1984 passed without a major incident attributed to the Brabant Killers. This hiatus is one of the most debated aspects of the case. Did they go to ground? Did they leave the country? Was one of them imprisoned for another crime? Or, as the darker theories suggest, were they being retrained or repurposed by their handlers? The lull gave the Belgian populace a false sense of hope. People began to return to their routines, thinking the nightmare was over. The police investigations, plagued by a lack of communication between districts and the loss of crucial files, seemed to stall. But the beast had not starved. It was merely hibernating. The autumn of 1985 brought a resurgence of violence so extreme it bordered on open warfare. On September 27th, the gang struck twice in one evening. First, at a Delhaize supermarket in Braine-l'Alleud. The brutality was immediate. They killed 3 people. Minutes later, they appeared at another Delhaize in Overijse. This time, 5 people were murdered. The victims included a child riding a bicycle in the parking lot. The killers fired at anyone who moved. They didn't even bother to take significant amounts of cash in some instances. It appeared that the terror itself was the currency. The psychological impact on Belgium was comparable to a war zone. Supermarkets began hiring armed guards. People were afraid to go out after dark. The government was in crisis, unable to protect its own citizens. The crescendo of this macabre symphony took place on November 9th, 1985, in the city of Aalst. It was the day before St. Martin's Day, a holiday for children. The Delhaize supermarket was packed with families preparing for the celebration. The gang arrived in their signature Volkswagen Golf GTI. They emerged, heavily armed and wearing hideous masks. Before they even entered the store, they began shooting people in the parking lot. Inside, it was chaos. They moved through the aisles, firing execution style. They corralled terrified shoppers, demanding money, but the violence seemed disconnected from the robbery. In the parking lot, a 9-year-old girl named Rebecca was waiting in a car with her family. The killers gunned down her father, her mother, and her brother right in front of her. She was the only survivor in that vehicle, wounded and traumatized beyond words. When the police arrived, a firefight ensued. This was one of the few times the authorities engaged the gang directly. The old man maneuvered the getaway car with expert precision, weaving through the chaos. Witnesses and police officers reported that one of the gang members, likely the killer, had been shot in the chest by a police officer's revolver. As the Golf GTI sped away into the darkness, many hoped that at least one of them would be found dead or seeking medical attention. But they vanished into the night. 8 people died in Ulst that day. It remains one of the darkest days in Belgian history. And then, just as suddenly as they had returned, they stopped. The Ulst massacre was the final attack. The investigation that followed is a labyrinth of incompetence, bad luck, and suspicious anomalies that have fueled conspiracy theories for decades. In the immediate aftermath, the rivalry between the judicial police and the gendarmerie hampered progress. Evidence was mishandled, crime scenes were trampled. But the strangeness went deeper than mere bureaucracy. In 1986, a year after the attacks ceased, investigators focused on a canal in Ronquière. They believed the gang might have dumped evidence there. Divers searched the murky waters and found nothing. However, a year later, in 1987, the same spot was searched again, and this time, they found a treasure trove. Bags containing weapons used in the attacks, bulletproof vests, and fragments of a Volkswagen Golf were pulled from the mud. But there was a problem. The items were in remarkably good condition for having been submerged for a year. Some forensic experts argued that the metal showed signs of having been in the water for only a few weeks. This led to the explosive theory that the evidence had been planted, dumped there recently to be found, perhaps to close the loop on the case or to frame a narrative. Who would have access to the evidence of the Brabant Killers and the ability to plant it under the noses of investigators? The suspicion turned inward, toward the state itself. This brings us to the suspects and the terrifying possibility that the call was coming from inside the house. The profiles of the killers, their tactical movement, their handling of weapons, their ability to evade roadblocks, screamed military or police training. This wasn't the work of desperate junkies. This was professional. One of the most prominent names to surface was Madani Bouhouche. Bouhouche was a former gendarme, a man with a reputation for brilliance and brutality. He was known to have far-right sympathies and was deeply involved in the murky underworld of illegal firearms. Along with his associate Robert Bezier, Bouhouche ran a private detective agency after leaving the force. They were criminals, certainly. Bouhouche was eventually convicted of murder in a separate case. But were they the Brabant Killers? The circumstantial evidence was compelling. Bouhouche fit the physical description of the giant. He had the training. He had the weapons connections. Years later, firearms were found in his attic, though ballistics never definitively matched them to the massacres. Bouhouche died in a freak accident in 2005, crushed by a tree while cutting wood, taking his secrets to the grave. But the theories go beyond just a few rogue cops. We must discuss the concept of the strategy of tension. During the Cold War, NATO and Western intelligence agencies established stay-behind networks across Europe. These were secret armies, trained to activate in the event of a Soviet invasion. In Italy, this network was known as Operation Gladio. The theory proposes that elements within these networks, or far-right groups associated with them, went rogue or were directed to commit acts of terrorism to terrify the population. The goal? To make the public demand a stronger police state, to demonize the left, and to ensure the government remained firmly in the grip of right-wing militarism. The senselessness of the Brabant killings, the shooting of children, the low monetary gain, fits the profile of terrorism designed to induce pure panic. Connected to this is the shadow of the Westland New Post, or WNP. This was a neo-Nazi organization active in Belgium at the time. Members of the WNP were known to conduct surveillance on supermarkets, ostensibly to train for intelligence gathering. Some former members claimed they had reconnoitered the very Delhaize stores that were later attacked. Was the gang a hit squad formed from the ranks of the WNP? Their leader, Paul Latinus, was found dead in an apparent suicide that many believe was a murder, adding another layer of silence to the mystery. Then there is the theory of the pink ballets, or ballets roses. This theory suggests that the killings were a smokescreen to cover up targeted assassinations related to a high-profile sex ring involving judges, politicians, and business elites. According to this narrative, the gang was hired to retrieve compromising evidence or eliminate blackmailers, and the mass slaughter was a distraction to mask the true motive. While sensational, this theory has persisted because of the undeniable corruption that plagued the Belgian establishment in the 80s. Let us return to the physical evidence and the missed opportunities. One of the most haunting images of the case is the robot portrait of the giant. With his dark hair and glasses, his face was plastered on every wall in Belgium. Thousands of tips came in. In recent years, a new lead emerged regarding a man named Christian B., a former member of an elite police unit known as the Diane Group. On his deathbed in 2015, he reportedly confessed to his brother that he was the giant. Christian B. was tall, had the training, and his physical appearance was a striking match for the famous sketch. The police interviewed him before he died, but he gave nothing up. When the story broke in 2017, it reignited the investigation. Divers went back into the canals. Old files were dusted off. But once again, definitive DNA evidence remained elusive. The Volkswagen Golf GTI itself is a character in this tragedy. The car used in the final attacks was modified. The killers had installed a reinforced fuel tank and changed the rear seat configuration to allow for more ammunition and easier movement. This speaks to a garage, a mechanic, a safe house where they could work on the vehicle undisturbed. Despite finding the burned-out wrecks of their getaway cars, forensics of the 1980s could not extract the fingerprints or DNA that we might find today. The killers were careful. They used stolen plates. They burned their vehicles. They left no trace. We must also consider the victims. The trauma inflicted on the survivors and the families of the deceased is immeasurable. For decades, they have fought for answers, often feeling abandoned by a judicial system that seemed more interested in protecting its own reputation than finding the truth. The investigation into the Brabant Killers is the longest running in Belgian history. Millions of pages of files have been generated. Judges have come and gone. The statute of limitations was set to expire, which would have meant that even if the killers were found, they could not be prosecuted. Recognizing the injustice of this, the Belgian Parliament changed the law, extending the statute of limitations specifically for this case, ensuring that the hunt can continue indefinitely. In recent years, modern forensic technology has been applied to the old evidence. DNA traces found on cigarette butts, masks, and clothing have been reanalyzed. The authorities have launched massive public appeals, releasing photos of weapons and asking the public to identify specific modifications made to the guns. They have released the photo of a man holding a SPAS 12 shotgun in the woods, asking if anyone recognizes him. They have urged anyone with information about the old man, who would be very elderly or dead by now, to come forward. The investigators are looking for the small fish, the people who might have supplied the car, the garage owner who looked the other way, the girlfriend who washed the blood out of a trench coat. Why does this case remain unsolved? Is it simply a perfect crime committed by ghosts? Or is the protection theory true? Many Belgians believe that the investigation was deliberately sabotaged from the inside. The delays, the lost files, the strange dredging of the canal. It all points to a cover-up. If the killers were indeed gendarmerie or intelligence assets, exposing them would have brought down the government and shattered the country's faith in its protectors. Perhaps the truth was too dangerous to be known. As we stand here today, looking back at the bloody years of 1982 to 1985, the Brabant Killers remain the ultimate boogeymen of the Low Countries. They are the shadows in the supermarket parking lot. They are the reminder that safety is an illusion. The men who pulled the triggers may be dead, buried in unmarked graves, or living out their final days in nursing homes, their secrets locked behind eyes that saw hell and didn't blink. But the files are still open. The investigators are still working. And the families are still waiting. The legacy of the Brabant Killers is not just a list of cold cases. It is a scar on the national psyche of Belgium. It forced a complete restructuring of the police forces, leading to the disbandment of the gendarmerie and the creation of a unified federal police service. It changed the way security is handled in public spaces. But most of all, it left a lingering question that haunts every aisle of every grocery store in the country. Who were they? This deep dive into the abyss has taken us from the rainy streets of Nivelles to the murky waters of the Ronquières Canal. We have looked into the eyes of madness and the cold calculations of political intrigue. The story of the Brabant Killers is a testament to the fact that sometimes the bad guys get away and the monsters are real. This has been a production of DCF Investigations. We have walked the timeline, examined the forensics, and explored the darkest corners of the conspiracy theories. Now, I turn the investigation over to you. Do you believe this was a case of ruthless criminal insanity? Or was it a calculated strategy of tension orchestrated by the state itself? Could the answers still be hidden in a forgotten file in Brussels? Share your theories in the comments below. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and until next time, keep searching for the truth.